Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Thank you for joining today's webinar hosted by the Sikh Research Institute, SikhRI. My name is Gurdev Singh and I will be the host and moderator for today's session. The presentation will begin shortly. Before we get started, I wanted to review a few housekeeping items and let you know how you can participate in today's web event. I will then provide some information about the Sikh Research Institute and today's presenter, Ravinder Singh, before turning it over for the main presentation. You're looking at the main GoToWebinar attendee interface, and it is made up of two parts: the viewer window on the left, and which allows you to see everything that the presenters will share on their screen, and the control panel is on your right. Now you use the orange arrow to open and close the panel. And the audio pane will provide audio information. By default, you can join the webinar via mic and speakers. If you prefer, you can join the audio via telephone by selecting Use Telephone, and the dial-in information will be displayed, including an audio pin. Questions during the webinar should be directed to the moderator. You can send your questions either by typing it in your attendee panel, or you may ask it over the mic. Please keep the questions short and relevant to the topic being presented. In case you do not have a mic, please state your name, city, and questions in the question panel. As a reminder, today's webinar is being recorded, and everyone will receive an email within 7 days with a link to view the recording of today's event. And if for any reason you experience any technical difficulties during the session and you can't see the main presentation, for example, then please do not hesitate to contact me via the chat panel. If you lose your internet connection or you have to restart your computer during this session, then you can rejoin the session by clicking on the URL that is included in your original registration confirmation email. Finally, at the end of this presentation, I will launch a testimonial and feedback window, and we'd really appreciate it if you could take a few moments to provide your feedback and comments on how this session went and how we can improve future sessions. Now, I will provide some background on the Institute and also Ravinder Singh, Taneja. Ravinder Singh spent his formative years in Singapore and Delhi and has worked with multinationals in Singapore, London, and New York, and currently works for a financial services company. His consuming passion is Sikhs and Sikhi in all flavors and dimensions, and he is actively involved with the local Sangat in Columbus, where he initiated a Gurbani Vicar group that has met weekly for over 3 years now. He is also the founder and convener of the Talking Stick, a weekly online colloquium devoted to a dialogue around Gurbani that appears on the online magazine sikhchic.com. Ravinder has served as acting Executive Director of SikhRI and is currently a member of SikhRI's Board of Directors. And so without further ado, I'd like to pass it on over to Ravinder Singh to begin today's presentation. And Ravinder, just give me a second, make you a presenter here. All right, Ravinder, you should be on.
Okay, thank you, Gurdev, for the introduction. And Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. To those of you who are on the other side of the divide here, I realize that it would be a lot more fun if we were in each other's physical presence. But I suppose our minds will connect regardless. I mean, the Guru reminds us that it is only a melding of minds that is a true meeting and a true Sangat. And the mind, I suppose, is virtual. Or is it? I'm not sure. In any event, I want to thank you again for participating in this live webinar sponsored by the Sikh Research Institute. And as Gurudev pointed out, I'm very closely associated with the Institute and its work because I think that you know, the work itself is, as someone said to me, not sexy, but very foundational, because we as an organization are committed to the development of the community, the internal development of the community. So we are not mainstream facing, but we are facing inwards to our community by providing educational resources for Sikhs, for any Sikh, or even non-Sikh for that matter, who wishes to lead a Guru-inspired life. This is to try and give them accessibility. So thank you again. Before I get into the presentation, just a couple of thoughts and ideas on why I chose being and becoming a Sikh as a title. This title, you know, is a borrowed one from the Christian theologian Paul Tillich, I believe, but I picked it up from a good friend of mine, Dr. Ravinder Singh, who's delivered some live webinars here in the past. He actually ended up writing a book of essays on Sikhi called Being and Becoming a Sikh. And it is of a special interest to me because I think it essentially conveys the idea that this is a dual process. And I do want to talk to you about the dual process as I see it. Because I think there is on the one hand a being and on the other hand a becoming. And we'll explore some of this as we go along. I also want to share with you a model that I incorporated from some leadership training within my business context. Because one of my desires actually has been to utilize contemporary frameworks, by which I mean, you know, the scientific temper that prevails in our world today, the sort of technology that is changing the way we educate ourselves. In other words, the lens that we wear in order to, I just wanted to use a contemporary lens to understand Gurmat and Gurbani for myself, and I'm just sort of test running some of my thoughts with you. Hopefully you'll find some of them interesting and some of them not so interesting. And it's called a theory U model. When I was first exposed to it, I was quite taken aback by the similarity it had to what I viewed as the journey of a Sikh. And I tried to contextualize that model to a SikhRI framework, and that is what I'm going to try and test drive with you today, so bear with me. So we want to talk about on being and becoming a Sikh first. So as I said, the title came to me from the book, Being and Becoming a Sikh. But there was also, many, many years ago, many moons ago, an incident which kind of triggered this whole process of thinking that I want to share with you. I kind of want to give you the context on how I sort of been thinking about this. And this involved a question that I was asked once, you know, are you a Sikh by birth? And very instinctively, I said yes. But no sooner had I provided the answer that I recognized that perhaps my answer was at best deficient, if not actually misleading, because by saying that I'm a Sikh at birth was implying that it's done, it's a fait accompli. I was born a Sikh, I am a Sikh. But that is not how I see Sikhi as a development process, which is, you know, the very term Sikh implies that you're a student, you're a pupil, you're a learner. And that would seem to me to suggest that there is a learning process that is going on constantly. So these ideas kind of stuck in my head, and I started to give it some attention. So as we explore this idea today, I mean, one of the things that I want to suggest to you is that there is a fundamental difference between being born a Sikh and being a Sikh, and there is a dynamic tension between the two. So being born a Sikh is, as I've got this on my slide, believing is seeing, passive, and a survival kit. What I mean by that is, you know, being born is obviously a happenstance. You know, birth and the selection of our parents is really not in our control. But it doesn't do any more than giving us the formality. And once you're born, you're given your milieu that we are in, your parents, your education, your experiences. They pretty much indoctrinate you, so that what you see is based on a belief system that has been acquired. What you do is based on experiences that are driven by this belief system. And then, on the other hand, these are like the means that you know, the British biologist Richard Dawkins mentioned. These are constant bombardments that shape us culturally. This is our cultural DNA, if you will. Just like we have a biological DNA, this is our cultural DNA. So we kind of just see through that fixed lens. Becoming a Sikh, on the other hand, there is an entirely different process, where being a Sikh is, you know, belief that is acquired. Becoming a Sikh is a movement towards an authentic faith, where believing is something acquired and meaning that is being given to you. Moving towards becoming a Sikh is more experiential, where being born a Sikh is basically what it boils to is passive internalization. Becoming a Sikh is active absorption. So, you know, on the one hand, you have handed down cultural scripts, and on the other hand, you have this desire, this longing to basically be more than you want to. So, to put it in a nutshell, basically what you're seeing in an individual is it's a conflict between the very limiting and circumscribing demands of our Haumai, so to speak, because all of our conditioning is really Haumai. That is what Haumai is. It's the conditioning that you get that leads you to believe that you are a separate entity. So this entity certainly wants to preserve itself. So there is, on the one hand, a limiting and circumscribing demand of this empirical self that we call me, I. And then there is the compulsion of our spirit, because the Guru reminds us, tu jot sarup hai. And the spirit wants to soar and be freed from the very restraints that tether us to our Haumai. So there's this conflict that is kind of going on in ourselves, and that is what I mean by suggesting that this is really a dual process that is going on in us, and some of my thinking around it. Now, I'm not suggesting by any means that belief is of no value at all. It certainly has a role to play in how we live. I mean, but you know, at bottom, the best that belief systems do for us is they translate the world for us in a way that is handed down to us. They are necessary for survival. It's nothing more than a survival kit. Whereas becoming a Sikh is truly transformational. So my suggestion is that all of us who are born Sikhs actually should become Sikhs. And in there lies a deliberate choice. Becoming a Sikh, in fact, life means deliberate choices. So there is a choice, and we must actively then seek to become Sikhs, to get on.
Welcome to GoToWebinar, Web Events Made Easy.
He has a birthright, which it isn't, to really becoming a student, to become a Sikh, as the term suggests. And it takes some doing, because it actually is asking you to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and that's very, very difficult, if not impossible. But it's an expression we use when we suggest that something is indeed very, very difficult to do. So this is some of the context within which I am speaking of being and becoming a Sikh. You know, this dual process that we are all experiencing at all times. Now, I mentioned earlier that one of my goals was to actually share with you some of the modeling that I have seen in leadership training and seminars that I'm constantly being exposed to at work. You know, one of the things at work that I'm talking about corporate life, is the idea that there seems to be some sort of a change that's going on, where we are all now realizing that leadership models have to change. They have to become more collaborative from being more command and control. We are also seeing the way we do work is changing, where it's becoming more collaborative. And one of the trainings that I was exposed to was with the Theory U. As you can see at the bottom, I have this model is adopted from Otto Scharmer's book, book Theory U, Learning from the Future as it Emerges. And when I went through this training, I was struck, absolutely struck, by how similar it was to a Sikh's journey. And this journey is obviously an inner journey, not an outward journey. So I want to share a little bit about this process. In fact, I'm trying to hold your attention to this U model that you see, and that I have adapted it with Gurmat terms, as you can see. Jigyasa, live, Haumai, Hukam, and so on. So I want to talk a little bit about the model before we get into the journey of Sikhi. So basically, this model was developed by Otto Scharmer. He's at MIT. He works with Peter Senge, who is the author of a book called The Fifth Discipline, where they talk about learning organizations. And they run an organization called the Society for Organizational Learning. And they essentially talk about change and on how to bring about change. So change at any level, whether it's individual, whether it's social, family, an organization, or societal, is just very difficult to deal with. And they talk about, if we want to essentially make a difference in how we change, we need what they call a new consciousness, a new collective leadership, and a capacity to meet our challenges more consciously, more intentionally, and in a more sort of strategic way. So when I heard collective leadership, new consciousness, guess what? I was thinking Sikhi, because our model is one of collective leadership, the Panch Pyaras and the Panch. It's all about collective leadership. And so Senge and Sharma also talk about, why do we fail when we try to change? And I'm going to just read a couple of lines which will resonate with you. They're saying the cause of our collective failure is that we are blind to the deeper dimension of leadership and transformational change. So they're talking about a blind spot that exists not only in our collective leadership, but in everyone. Basically, we are disconnected from the source. Again, as I went through this, I'm thinking that's what our Guru reminds us, that we are thrashing about because we are not connected to our source. So what they've done is they've captured this conceptual model in what they call a U theory, and I have it up here on the screen for you. Just to sort of give you an idea. So I've been tinkering around with this, and to be quite honest, I don't know whether what I'm going to say makes sense, but this is how the journey of a Sikh appears to me, and I'm going to share some of those thoughts with you now. So as we move, so if you look at the U model, on the left side is basically individual practice, individual initiatives. It's the individual at work on the left side. And they, of course, describe this model as having three phases, which they've listed as sensing. The second one at the bottom is presencing. The third one at the top is realizing, and it has 7 steps, 7 processes to it. The first one reads suspending, redirecting is 2, letting go 3, letting come 4, and then you have inspiration, prototype, and institutionalizing on the right side. So essentially the left side is talking about the individual, okay, the capacities that an individual needs to develop, and on the right side is how they manifest socially and how they manifest in how we live our lives. So I found this a rather interesting. And then at the bottom where I have that star, that is mine by the way, is where transforming occurs. So when I walk through this whole thing with you with Gurmat terminology and Gurmat concepts, you will see what I was trying to, how I was thinking when I saw this. So let's start at the very first here on the left. What they're saying is for any change to happen at any level, that's the foundational capacity is to be able to listen, attention. Now that's very interesting because that is what Gurbani tells us. In fact, our entire spiritual formation, the entire sadhana of a Sikh, if you want to call it that, our entire spiritual development rests on attention. Sunye, in Jigyasa, it's very foundational. And here we have these guys from MIT telling us it is the quality of your attention that really makes the difference. If you can change the underlying structure of your attention, you will begin to operate from a level that you have not before. You will actually expand your consciousness. So I was very struck. Now, the thing is, how do you suspend your, the first step is suspending. In other words, you have to stop and suspend your current mode of thinking. You have to be able, as they put it, see your own seeing. Now, that's a very difficult thing to do. Seeing your own seeing is perhaps the most difficult thing that we can do, but that is indeed the first step we need to take, is to see your own seeing. And now in Gurmat terminology, I see that as Jigyasa. Jigyasa, or examining oneself. And that, without Jigyasa, Gurbani has a tuk that says, Mool na bujjan apna se pasua se tor jiyo. This is Guru Nanak in Rag Suhi admonishing us, calling us animal-like for our failure to inspect and introspect. This is really what is meant by suspending. The old Greek philosopher Socrates is alleged to have said, the unexamined life is not worth living. So self-examination becomes the starting point for every Sikh, Jigyasa. That is what we have to kindle in ourselves. And what that means in daily parlance is questioning, questing, curiosity, a spirit of inquiry, understanding, why is the world the way it is, sort of just to get into this mode. That is where the spiritual quest begins, because it moves you out of your acquired beliefs that we just talked about. And then what happens when your Jigyasa is kindled in yourself, what you will find very naturally is that the mind tends to move inwards. In other words, it becomes more absorbed, and that is the word that they're using is redirecting. I have borrowed from Gurbani to say that is really live. Live is to sort of heeding your inner voice to actually heal the fracture that you have in terms of how you relate to reality around you, the dualism that you feel. I'm separate, I'm different from you, or I see objects, which is fine. That's one level of at which we operate. But live then is the term that Gurbani uses to suggest how we redirect our attention. So our attention has to move away from outward objects and becomes more introspective. It starts to access pathways within ourselves. And that is when you begin to move towards your deepest source, your inner Mantu Jyot Sarupa. That's how you start moving. So this is basically how you begin to cultivate that capacity, by anchoring in live. So that's the second one here. And then, you know, I can't spend too much time talking about, but I will in a little bit of time on the tools and techniques and so on. But so basically what you're seeing is we have to move away from self-centered activity. I mean, you know, Gurbani talks about two orientations available to a person. Live up doi raah hai. Hukmi kar kamaye. So you can either move in the direction of live, or you can move in the direction of tat. Tat is also referred to as taturbazi, which is self-centered, self-conscious, intellectual activity, outward moving. And it's basically, again, as I said earlier, survival-driven. It's body-centered. It is characterized by a lot of anxiety, stress, worry, fear for the future. This is something that we can all relate with. We kind of lead our daily lives like this. And live is a movement, as I said, to your deepest source, to being more guru-centered, to actually kindling your emotional IQ better and living in a state of anand or sahaj. So that essentially is the movement. And we'll talk a little bit about the tools, but let me come down to letting go and letting come. This is really foundational. But let me just change my mind here. Let's talk about the tools a little bit. So how do you move inwards from 1 to 2 to move to 3? You know, in Gurmat, in Gurbani, one of the most, I suppose, foundational, in fact, the spinal, if you will, concept is that of Naam. And of course, there's a lot of conversation around Naam because it's something that you do Japana, you do Simrana, you do Naam, you refer to Naam as a creative force, you refer to Naam as God himself or Waheguru. So it has many semantic connotations within Bani. The way I look at Naam is that, you know, Naam is really the end, it's the process, and it is the tool itself. And it is what I would call, what Gurbani calls the jukti, or the way to do things. Because Bani is very clear on one thing, that you need a jukti to actually succeed in a spiritual quest. And because, you know, in Jigyasa there is a line that says, Jorna jugti chute sansar. So jornal nahi. It's not through brute force, but through using your capacities, your faculties, and using the right methodology to actually to achieve your end. So Jugat, you know, is how do we cultivate the skill or the art or the methodology or the technique to actually realize our aim here, which is Naam. And I would suggest to you that you know, that is really a topic in itself. But I was just very recently talking about Naam to a group of people, and I said, you know, I am not sure, how do you do Naam Simran? And I said, for starters, let's think about Simran being, you know, the capacity to remember. How do you remember a God that you don't really know in his, you know, transcendental form? Where is the God that you know? He's all around you in his creation. So I suppose the Simran has to be directed to creation, and what we suggested was that one good way of doing that was to do it in your speech, in your thought, and in your action. So when you're dealing with other people, make sure that when you talk to them, you think of them as being a unity with yourself. And when you see when you think about someone, that you're thinking about, again, as this person being a divine manifestation, just as you are. So that's probably the practice. But Japji itself offers a toolbox, which is the last pori, Jat Pahara, Tirad Sunyar. Therein lie some of the methodologies, and I won't go into them in any detail, but Babaji talks about restraint, he talks about patience, he talks about discernment, he talks about an inner fire, a resolve. So we basically need all of these things in order to do Nam Japna and Nam Simrana. That is really our toolbox from moving from 1 to 2 down to 3. So what happens when you incorporate that is you are coming down to the bottom of the curve. And so what happens at the bottom of the curve? This is where transformation happens. They call, as you can see, presencing, which is transformation. Here I want to pause for a second and talk about another concept that the developers of this conceptual tool talked about. And they said it is very important to realize the relationship of wholes and parts. We typically, when we look outside, we think of the world, the old concept of world being a machine where different parts come together. However, the reality is it's closer to how Gurbani describes the whole, that we are all Jo Pinde Soi Brahmande. In other words, we are manifestations of the whole. The whole is actually manifesting through its parts. And what is in this part is in the whole. So keep that in mind. So what is happening here is you're letting go. You're letting go of fixed identities. You're letting go of your Haumai. So Haumai is another very central concept to Gurbani. Not the place for us to go into, but in a nutshell, I call it this isolating bubble of consciousness. We are constantly turning others into an object. It's a structure inside of us. And we have to think about whether or not it even has a real existence and how does it get created. In Gurbani, we know that Haumai has been used both as a sense of self and as the process of creation itself. How much Aya, how much Jigyasa. So inherent in how we are constructed is this tendency to see ourselves as separate. I mean, our minds are constructed hierarchically. It thinks in hierarchical terms. Yet, beyond the mind, Waheguru is not composed of these. So therein lies the problem. We talk about a Waheguru who is beyond description, but we have to speak about Waheguru in language, which has its own very limiting structure. So no matter what word I use, it's always limiting. And so basically, the idea is to, when you reach that stage, you will begin to let go of your Haumai. You will find that you are letting go of your Haumai. And again, then, what will you begin to see? Letting come. So what they are referring to letting come here is an emergent future that is not altogether clear. So, Hukam, again, I've been asking this question for a long time in my head. What is Hukam? How do I know what the Hukam is for me? And is there a Hukam that I can understand? Because, on the one hand, we are told Hukam Rajai Chalna, that we have to move with Hukam. On the other hand, it says Hukam Keha Na Jai. So it suggests that by definition, it's beyond definition. You can't be described. It's beyond description. So how do I understand Hukam? And Hukam takes on shades of meaning. Here, what I have begun to sort of recognize, and I want to share with you, is that what you begin to understand about Haumai and Hukam is, first, that you realize you're not singular. You're really not singular, that you are indeed plural. You are actually part of a very large network. So one of the exercises that we had to do was to list capacities, gifts that we have and try and understand how did we become aware of them. And, this was really like capturing a life. And, something very interesting came out of the whole discussion. We realized that nothing that we owned or nothing that we had or nothing, any capacity that we had was actually all given to us, either by parents, as we talked about earlier, it has all come to us, really. The tool set that we have has all come to us. So you begin to see how I am connected. I mean, even at a very material level, economically, the shirt I'm wearing is dependent on somebody's capacity to make it and exchange it with me with money. And then you begin to see how we are all interconnected. And that's when Hukam as an emerging future begins to take hold. So what I'm suggesting here is, Hukam, of course, used differently in different contexts within Gurbani as the spiritual impulse that's driving our species. It regulates the natural order. We know that it establishes moral and ethical frameworks and exists in ourselves as well. But what this is suggesting to you is that there is another form of knowing or understanding that surpasses our intellect. And it is this mystical faculty that I like to think of as Hukam. Our ability to open our access to this mystical faculty that resides in us. My understanding is that this is also knowledge that is already dormant in us. We have just forgotten it. Vismaran. So it is simply a process of bringing it back up, making it more dormant. And what you will find is that this Hukam is also teleological in nature, that it is the emerging future, because that's what these guys from MIT was telling us, that you cannot really fully describe how the future is going to look like. It emerges, and you need a different kind of capacity to understand it. And this is what leaders do, whether it's at a personal level, at a social level, at an organizational level, is they can see this emerging pattern better than others and see it first, because they're really looking at it from a different perspective, and in some ways beyond the perspective of Haumai. So this is where the transformation takes place, and then some interesting things start to happen. Well, what happens is that, and we're now moving up to the right side, inspiration, and I've associated that with Chardi Kala. Chardi Kala, of course, is a skill. We talk about it as eternal optimism, but I also see it as Kala is skill. Chardi, of course, means excellence, meaning shikhar, hunarmandi da shikhar. So you start becoming inspired by excellence. You start becoming inspired by you recognize that you are in the service of a larger whole. That is the transformation. You begin to presence the larger whole. That you realize that I am Akal Purakh ki Phauj. That is when you understand that you're a foot soldier in Guru Nanak's army, and you begin to make that determination. Am I now going to work for this larger force, the Waheguru, Hukam, Guru Nanak's army, or am I still going to be ego-centered, as I have been all along? So this transformation, of course, it's not sequential. It's very sort of moves it cyclically, but that's where transformation happens. And once that transformation begins to happen, inspiration or Chardi Kala begins to set in, and you become more and more active in trying to bring about a future that is for the benefit of a larger whole. And then, 6 and 7 refer to prototyping. I'm keeping an eye on the time here. Prototyping and institutionalization of that feeling. I will actually just stop in a few minutes by just giving you an example that I have used with friends and others, that if you trace Guru Nanak's life along this curve, you will see that it kind of fits, from what we know of his life through Janam Sakhis and so on. Jigyasa, questioning. He was questioning everything. We know the incidents at Hardwar. We know about the incident in Makkah. We know that even as a young boy, he was questioning the ceremony of the sacred thread. So he was certainly questioning. And then from the Saki of the river Bain, where we are told that he spent 3 days, people thought he had drowned. I would suggest that he was probably plumbing deep into the depths of his own surt, in his own consciousness. I think Sakis have a symbolic meaning rather than a literal meaning. So, he was in the stream of his consciousness. He was actually accessing his source. And then being in transformation. We talk about how he came out transformed, announcing that there was no Hindu and no Muslim. And then his inspiration soon after that, right? I mean, he actually talks about his mission. How tadi Vicar is what he says, Kare Laya. I was an unemployed minstrel. Akal Purkh ne mere modhe te haath rakhya. And he became inspired by the mission. And then what did he do? He prototyped. He traveled. He crystallized his ideas. He traveled for over, 29 years, crystallizing his message and then prototyping it. A thing to remember here about prototyping is that, it does not take too many people to start a movement. So it should not deter us. If you want to do something, look at Guru Nanak. When he started Kartarpur, he had a handful of Sikhs there. But that was the prototyping. And every guru that followed him pretty much moved that prototyping forward by developing institutions. And then at the end of the day, we have the institutions of the Panth today. So all of this, I thought, fit this model so well. And people, I'm thinking about youngsters. I'm thinking about young adults. I'm thinking about, I'm a lot older than that. I feel quite comfortable in Punjabi as well as in English, but I feel that we have a group of people that are not that comfortable with Punjabi, that are also, a little more given, they don't like being lectured to, even though I'm lecturing right now, but they want interaction and they want to think in terms of, what's going on around us. I thought this kind of message would appeal not only to them, but to everybody else. So I'm just, as I said, taking these thoughts out for a test run. I hope that you've enjoyed listening to what I've had to say and perhaps some of the nonsense that I might have mentioned. But with that, Khema Vajachak, Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh, I'd be quite happy to take questions at this point. Yeah, one of the interesting things about doing a webinar like this is you really don't know whether you're talking to yourself or talking to a bunch of people. Nonetheless, it's a good exercise. I haven't seen any questions so far.
Yes. I am also wondering, there are really no questions to ask, Ravinder. Can everybody hear me?
You won't hear them, I think.
Right. Oh, normally they can type in the questions panel, and if they need to talk on the mic, I can just unmute them by default.
Hello, Gurdev.
Anji.
Anji, Mr. Taneja, this is Harpreet. I have a question or comment from Mani Singh. Mani Singh, if you don't mind typing in your location, that'd be great. But the question or the comment is, sometimes it feels like that at the Gurdwaras, Naam is being explored in the dimension of name only, rather than broader dimension of Naam, as in identification with divine. Naam is in realization of the message of Guru through words of Bani. Naam as in body of spiritual knowledge or divine traits. Naam as in essence of spirituality above convention, religion, etc. Please pardon me if I'm getting out of context here. However, I want to understand the concept correctly.
Oh, I think you certainly, what you've just said through Harpreet Sangha Mani Singh Ji resonates very much with me. I think what has happened is that in the Gurdwaras, what has happened is that we have become stuck in this notion of repetition. And that is something that we need to really investigate and see if it makes sense. Gurbani, for example, might say to you, Saas Gira Simrana, which means you have to do Simran with every breath. Now, if you think about it logically, that's impossible if you have to sit there with a mala in your hand or with your eyes closed, just doing Waheguru, 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 if you have to do that kind of repetition. I mean, you don't have to go beyond that logic to say, obviously, it could not mean this. It must mean something else. So, while repetition in itself is a technique, we should not mistake that for Naam. I think that a lot of faith traditions use techniques like repetition to quieten and center the mind. Mananu kendrit karna, that is its purpose. It is not an end in itself, and it is not something that you can practice 24 hours a day. And as I said, and even I mentioned that, you know, semantically, Naam is used in many different ways, and you've given an excellent description. It is, you know, a body of spiritual knowledge. It's the creator. The way I see it is, it's Waheguru's creative agency, in essence, that is running through the world, and our business is to somehow tap into that creative agency. So, Mani Singh ji, I hope I've made sense to you, but I agree with exactly what you're saying.
Okay, then there is one from Amra. Why do our fellow Sikhs not so questioning? Example, following the human form of Sikh leaders. Are you able to see the question, Ravinder?
No, I haven't seen the question, but I think I heard you say, why do some Sikhs still follow the path of following human gurus?
Yeah, form of human Sikh leaders. The Western thought has progressed by questioning. Do we have some way to go? Any thoughts? And
well, you know, my answer, Singh ji, is that I suppose it's a sing. If it is a four, I beg your pardon. But the fact, Amrit ji, is this: life is a work in progress, and we all have to engage with Gurbani in light of our own experience, in light of our own capacity, in light of our own knowledge. And, you know, a lot of us, and cultural habits die very hard. Cultural habits die very hard, even though the Guru spent over 250 years trying to explain to us that the Guru is the Sabad, not a human body. A lot of us, I suppose, have trouble getting past it. And you know, there are passages after passages in Gurbani that would lead you to believe that we have to really, at the end of the day, connect with ourselves. So connecting with ourselves is connecting with Waheguru. So this is really a very do-it-yourself religion as far as I'm concerned. And Sabad is knowledge. We just have to build on our knowledge through Sangat. Sangat is the space. That is really the Guru for us, is the Sangat. Is a social space that has its own social technology, which is Gurbani Vicar, and the Guru is mystically present there. So the Guru cannot be any human, but collectively in Sangat, the Guru is present in a mystical sense through his knowledge. And when Sikhs come together and exchange with each other, Gurbani Vichar Vitandra, that is how we grow. I hope I've answered your question.
Mr. Taneja, एक गुरमीत बावा तो हैगा question or comment, and it's in our chat window too, if you would like to read it.
Okay.
It says, I just want to thank you for doing the webinar. I really appreciate it, especially for me being a medical student. It is so important to understand how to keep Sikhi a big part of my life. Thank you. Okay, so it's just a comment.
Yeah, Gurmeet ji, I want to thank you for joining in today. I want anyone who's who's hearing me to realize that, like you, I'm on the path. I'm a fellow Sikh. I'm certainly, and this is a never-ending process. And you know, the process gets more and more fun as we delve into it. Believe me, just being on the process is a delightful experience. So I would encourage all of you to stay on the process, not to be afraid to question, to think about Sikhi in the light of how you understand the world around you. I will share this with you, Gurmeet. When I began, you know, I spent a lifetime laboring under the illusion that Sikhi, like other Indian thought, meant running away from the world. And I spent many years doing nothing but bark and repetition and so on. It wasn't until I personally began to engage with Gurbani one-on-one, after doing ardas every morning, that I recognized the error of my ways. I began to see how wrong I was. That Sikhi actually is very active, dynamic, world-accepting. So we all need to be activists, and I would recommend to you to continue this process and not be afraid. Thank you.
Okay. Should we conclude this session then?
If you don't have any other questions, sure.
Haji Gurudev, go ahead.
Okay, I'll just pass on the presentership back to the institute. Here and show my screen. Okay, just as a reminder, please send your questions along with your name and city if you have any. I think Ravinder might be able to also share an email address, and if you have something you'd like to ask on a more personal basis, we can have that facilitated. And thank you for all your questions, and my apologies to those questions that were not addressed. I think we addressed all of them. Please be reminded that these webinars are provided for free, but there is a cost associated with its technology and administration. If you feel you have benefited from this particular webinar or others in the past, please consider making a donation to SikhRI or becoming a webinar sponsor. And more details can be obtained in the follow-up email you will receive or by emailing info@sikhri.org. If Ravinder, do you have any closing comments? I can pass it back on to you.
Sure. I just want to thank everyone who was in attendance for joining in. I think that a cyber Sangat now is becoming more and more of a reality, and we just have to be able to learn how to interact with one another in this kind of virtual space as well. I had a ball doing this. I hope you did too. Thank you very much, and hope to talk to you all soon.
All right, thank you, Ravinder, for all for the whole session. I hope we all learned something from it. And as I end the webinar, I'd like to thank the presenter and the audience for coming today to remind everyone to wait for a few seconds for the link to appear to a follow-up survey. Your feedback is extremely important to Sikh Research Institute. We appreciate your time. And with that said, thank you everybody. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.